This is Ocean Child, performed at the Lark Theatre in Balbriggan by Stephen Rea, Neil Martin and the West Ocean String Quartet, Louise Mulcahy on uilleann pipes, Geraldine O'Doherty on harp and boy soprano, Matthew Indicuzzi.
The RMS Tayleur was a White Star Line iron-hulled clipper that set sail on her maiden voyage from Liverpool on January the 19th, 1854, bound for Australia. With 5 classes of accommodation, she was built and fitted out to a high degree of luxury within a surprisingly short period of time. Many of the passengers were tempted to Australia in the hope of a new and better life, and had chosen the Tayleur because of the reputation and experience of her captain, John Noble. He was lauded for his recent 13-month record-breaking voyage from Liverpool to Australia, on to China, and back home via New Orleans and the West Indies. Amongst the trades of the passengers on board were that of weaver, carpenter, farrier, farmer, seaman, labourer, staymaker and upholster. Capable of carrying 4,000 tons, her cargo included wood, iron, headstones, fireplaces, crockery, books, ploughs, 2 pianos, slates and various tools for gold mining, house building and general labour. The voyage was expected to take around 3 months. But 2 days into her journey, she ran aground onto Lambay Island with the loss of hundreds of lives. There had been no sea trial before the ship left port, and there were questions about her crew, the ropes, the rudder, the rigging, the masts, the anchor chains, the captain, and crucially, the 3 compasses that, on account of the iron hull, were displaying a considerable disparity between them. Passengers and crew lists weren't as accurately recorded or monitored at that time, and reports and accounts vary as to the numbers on board. Some records claim there were 652 on board, whereas at the inquest it was stated that there were 576. Some sources claim that there were 488 passengers and a crew of 71. Others claim there was a crew of 82. Some claim 294 souls were lost, including 56 children and 13 infants. Others claim that 370 lives were lost. Definitive numbers we are unlikely to ever know. What we do know is that it was a tragedy of colossal proportions. The Illustrated London News, 28th January 1854, a week after the disaster. The Tayleur sailed from Liverpool for Melbourne at 5 minutes to 12 on Thursday, the 19th of January, with 652 persons on board, including the crew, and at about 8 p.m. was off Holyhead. After nightfall, it began to blow strongly, and during all next day, the ship struggled with an adverse wind. Charles Edward Lee, Nina, County Tipperary, a surviving second-class passenger, said at the inquest, "The captain gave the order to have the topsail reefed, but the crew being very inefficient, they were a considerable time before they could take in the reef. Captain Noble declared to the passengers in my presence that if he had known the description of the crew he had on board, he would not have put to sea with them. About 3 o'clock on Friday morning, the captain sent the third mate aloft to see what the seamen were doing. When the mate came down, he said, 'There are 3 or 4 of those beggars lashed to the top asleep.'" Robert Holland, Ireland, first-class passenger and the owner of 2 yachts. "I saw some of the sails clewed up and others flapping. The mizzen topsail and the main topsail were torn. I assisted myself in endeavouring to furl and clew up those sails, as I saw that the men were not capable of doing it. The ropes were new and the blocks were too small for them to run through. At least the ropes would not run freely through them." Charles Edward Lee, again. "On Friday, we boxed about the channel all day with a headwind. The weather throughout the whole day was thick and hazy, and no observations of sun to horizon could be taken. At 12 o'clock on Friday night, Captain Noble, who had not gone to bed previously, gave charge of the ship to the first mate and went below. At this time, the vessel had been 7 hours on one tack. A seaman passenger and 4 or 5 of the second-class passengers, including myself, came on deck and remonstrated with the first mate as to the danger of keeping the vessel so long on the one tack. During the conversation, Captain Noble came on deck, said he was the master of the ship and would allow no man to interfere. Captain Noble himself stated at the inquest that she would not pay off. I could assign no cause for her not paying off, but was much surprised by it. She answered the helm very badly. Another vessel would have done this work in half the time and in only half the distance." The Illustrated London News. As Saturday wore on, the weather became boisterous, and about 10 a.m., land was in sight. In order to avoid any possible danger, the ship's course was altered. About 11:30, and she was hauled up 2 points to windward. It was whilst on this course, and at about half an hour later, that the man in the bows on the lookout cried out, "Breakers on the starboard bow!" It was then blowing heavily and a high sea running. The helm was put to starboard, the sheets of the headsails let go, and every means taken to bring the ship round on a course free from the threatened danger. It was then impossible to see a cable's length from the vessel, and in about 20 minutes more, she struck with great violence on a reef of rocks running out from a creek right to the eastward bluff of Lambay Island. The shock was tremendous, shaking the vessel from stem to stern. She rose on the next wave and drove in, rather broadside on. And when she struck again, still heaving, the sea made a clean breach over her midships, setting everything on deck afloat. After 2 or 3 more shocks, the ship began to sink by the stern, and the scene of confusion and dismay that ensued baffles all description. The passengers rushing up the hatchway, husbands carrying their children, and women lying prostrate on the deck with their infants, screaming and imploring help. The Illustrated London News. The ship's quarter drifted on towards one side of the creek, and one of the cook's assistants and 5 seamen contrived to jump across on shore and thus saved their lives. A rope and a spar were afterwards got across, and by this means a number of lives were rescued, chiefly through the activity and devoted gallantry of 2 or 3 young men, passengers, whose exertions in saving the lives of their fellow sufferers deserve the highest praise. Those who attempted to escape by the bows of the vessel, all, or nearly, met a miserable fate. The moment they fell into the water, the waves caught them and dashed them violently against the rocks, and the survivors on shore could perceive the unfortunate creatures with their heads bruised and cut open, struggling amidst the waves, and one by one sinking under them. An unnamed first cabin passenger who managed to get on shore gives the following account of the sad scenes which followed. The doctor of the ship, a most noble fellow, struggled hard to save his wife and child. He had succeeded in getting about halfway to the shore on a rope, holding his child by its clothes in his teeth. But just then the ship lurched outwards, by which the rope was dragged from the hands of those who held it. The poor fellow, with his child, was buried in the waves. But in a short time he again appeared above the water, manfully battling with the waves and the portions of the wreck that now floated about him. He at length swam to a ladder hanging by a rope alongside the ship and got upon it. After he'd been there a minute or 2, his wife floated close to him. He immediately took hold of her and dragged her onto the ladder, tenderly parted the hair from her face, and appeared to be encouraging her. But in another minute she was washed from his hold and sank almost immediately. He then got up again into the ship and tried to get his wife on shore, but they both perished. Mr. W. Jones, London, cabin passenger from the Leeds Times, 28th January. The most desperate struggles for life were made by the wretched passengers, and among some of the earliest females who attempted to get on shore were some young Irish women. Most of them lost the hold of their rope and fell into the sea. The ropes were crowded by hundreds who, in their eagerness, terror, and confusion, frustrated each other's efforts for self-preservation. Many of the females got halfway, and after clinging to the rope for a short time, then became unable to proceed further. They were forced from their hold by those who came after them. The Illustrated London News. The scene was now most harrowing. Hundreds were seen hanging onto the bulwarks of the ship, each struggling to get on shore. Every wave washed off scores at a time. We could see them struggle for a moment, then tossing their arms, sink to rise no more. At length, the whole of the ship sank under water. There was one fine young man left on the top of the rigging, but they could not reach him. And when he saw them going away, his cries were heart-rending. About 2 o'clock the next morning, the Coast Guard managed to reach him after he had been in the top 14 hours. You may fancy the poor fellow's joy at his deliverance. The Stamford Mercury, the scene at the part of the coast where the accident occurred was a most horrible one to behold the next morning. No less than 47 corpses, all frightfully mutilated, were taken out of a creek. Such had been the violence of the waves in dashing them against the rocks that nearly all were in a state of nudity, their clothes being torn from their bodies. 2 or 3 were without heads, others had their limbs nearly severed, and some presented a still more shocking spectacle. Illustrated London News. Out of the entire number of persons on board, only 280 individuals were saved, so that 370 lives must have been lost altogether. News of the wreck having been taken to Dublin, the steam packet Prince was sent to Lambay Island on Sunday afternoon, and next morning, the whole of the passengers and crew who had been rescued were taken to Dublin, where comfortable accommodation was provided for them. The Liverpool Mercury, 24th of January. We learn that a letter has been received from Captain Noble, but it conveys nothing like an accurate account of the cause of the disaster. It appears that he had 2 sails blown away in the gale of Friday and Saturday morning. His rudder, a patent one, is complained of as difficult to work, and his compasses were wrong. A subscription list has been opened in Liverpool in aid of the unfortunate sufferers by this deplorable wreck. It is headed by Mr. Charles Moore, one of the owners, with £150, followed by the names of Messrs. Pilkington and Wilson, the Liverpool agents, £100. Mr. James Baines of the Black Ball line of Australian packets, £100. There were no less than 4 inquiries into the loss of the Tayleur. The most remarkable feature was the speed with which conclusions were reached and reports subsequently published. The inquest, which began on Friday the 27th of January and was held in Davis's Hotel, now the Grand, in Malahide, was over in less than a week. Several surviving passengers and crew were called and examined. Amongst them, Mr. Michael Reedy from Scariff, County Clare. I remarked to the captain that the passengers felt greatly disappointed at the crew, the more so on account of their having had confidence in him that he would not have gone to sea with such hands. The captain said, "I knew no more than they were, than you did. They engaged themselves in Liverpool as good and efficient men, and I had no opportunity of knowing what they were until now. When I find that they are not efficient and indifferent as they are, they have gone down and hid themselves among the passengers and can't be found." Mr. Robert Davidson of Kent was the next witness. "I am a seaman. I was a passenger on the Tayleur. I have been 26 years at sea. I went on board on Wednesday afternoon and she sailed on Thursday. She was in great confusion, like all other new ships. Some things were out of order, including the reef tackles, which should have been all right before the vessel left port. I mixed through the crew between that period and the time she struck. There were a great many foreigners among them, I think 12 or 14. I think about 8 of these foreigners understood English, and the rest did not, and had to be interpreted by others. In moments of danger, it is of great importance that men should know the orders given to them. Although the lead was prepared, I did not observe any soundings being taken, nor did I see the log heaved. I did see the captain endeavouring to take the sun." Previous to the shipwreck, the captain set the foresail, hauled out and set the spanker, and then he tried to set the main staysail. But the rope got off the belaying pin and knocked 2 or 3 men down. We were obliged to haul the sail down, and as soon as it was hauled down, the captain shouted, "Let go the anchor," and ran forwards himself to set it loose. The starboard anchor was let go and took all the chain, which was on deck, about 90 fathoms. It snapped like glass. I cannot say why it did so. There was not much way on the vessel at the time, but chains will sometimes break owing to flaws, even after being carefully examined. The vessel then drifted nearly clear of the nose of the island, stern foremost, but she lost her way. Her sails filled and she fell off before the wind and went right into the little bay where she struck broadside on. William Thompson, Liverpool, passenger. When the vessel went ashore, the stern windows were open and the water poured in rapidly through 'tween decks, and when she began to sink, she went on her beam ends from off the land, her masts falling seaward. The ropes fastened from the ship to the rocks were now broken, destroying the only mode of escape. The sinking of the ship was not sudden, but she settled down gradually and then remained stationary, the greater portion of the masts and rigging appearing above water. There were a number of persons on board after the ship fell off from the rocks, and they then assembled about the bowsprit and the forepart of the ship, this being the only portion that remained afloat. Very few were saved. James McClellan, Prince Edward Island, Canada, crew. After the captain saw the land, I never heard his voice. When he got the ship underway, he let go both anchors, and they snapped like a carrot. He had a hole in her quarter. All in the saloon were drowned. The land where we struck was 50 feet high. We struck 10 minutes before 1. It was very foggy. The 3 compasses did not agree within 3 points in consequence of the ship being iron. There should have been a compass aloft at the royal masthead. I saw hundreds of dead bodies, women and children. There was one woman who said, "I have £3,000 in my stays, and I will give any man £200 who will take me on shore." She was drowned. Charles Edward Lee, Nina, County Tipperary, second-class passenger. At this time, no more than 25 passengers had reached shore. The majority had jumped onto the rock. Mr. John Gibson of Cavan and myself, seeing that there were no other means of assisting our fellow passengers, got up to the forecastle, took hold of a spare spar and forced one end on the rock. We lashed the other end to the bulwarks of the vessel. By means of this temporary bridge, we both landed and were followed by about 100 other passengers. As soon as we got ashore, we stood by the spar to prevent it being dragged from the rock by the motion of the ship. In about 15 minutes, the ship gave a tremendous lurch and dragged the spar off the rock, thus at once and forever cutting off all communications between the ship and the shore. After that, only 5 lives were saved, including that of Captain Noble. The captain was up to his waist in water in the stern before he attempted to leave the ship. He then pulled off all his clothes, but his trousers and shirt, threw himself into the sea and struck out for the shore. 2 young men were standing on the rock as he approached the shore, and they pulled him up. He got hold of a portion of the rock and held fast, but the next wave carried away the 2 men who assisted him, and they were drowned. Noble spoke later of how his bare feet accidentally touched their corpses in the water as he scrambled to get ashore. Captain John Noble to a juror. If the cables had not parted, the ship would have been saved. She was only going about 2 knots an hour. The ship was very sharp and would therefore have ridden through the seas easier. It was much as could be expected that the cables should hold. And to the coroner, the cables having parted, the ship drifted right ashore and grounded, aft very easy. She was afloat forward. I kept the headboards braced full for the purpose of swinging her in broadside to the rocks so as to give the passengers a chance of getting off. We made no attempt to lower the lifeboats. They would not be able to live in the sea. From the time I left Liverpool, I did not find myself at a loss for hands. I attribute her slow answering the ship's helm to the fact of her foremast being too far aft and the rudder too small. The Illustrated London News, 4th February, 1854. An inquiry into the causes of the wreck of the Tayleur commenced yesterday week, Friday, January 27th, at Malahide before the Dublin County Coroner. The inquest was brought to a conclusion on Monday evening when the jury returned the following verdict: that the parties were drowned by the sinking of the said ship off Lambay Island, and that this deplorable accident occurred in consequence of the highly culpable neglect of the owners in permitting the vessel to leave port without compasses properly adjusted or a sufficient trial having taken place to learn whether she was under control of her helm or not. And we find that Captain Noble did not take sufficient precaution to ensure the safety of the vessel by rounding to after he found the compasses were in error. But we consider from the time the vessel came in sight of land, he acted with coolness and courage and used every exertion in his power to save the lives of the passengers. The Board of Trade inquiry was completed a few days later, and the Liverpool Marine Board exonerated Captain Noble by the 7th of April. By today's standards, there remain questions about the inquest and inquiries. Their brevity in some cases, the composition of the jury, and the associated conflicts of interest, the fact that the ship was only partially insured, the various anomalies and contradictions in evidence, and a mysterious and seemingly influential figure from Liverpool who ghosted in and out, a Mr. Jones. It felt that in part at least there may have been some element of prearrangement about it all. To quote a local Scottish newspaper, the difficulties of newspaper management required no aggravation. A skinflint ship owner will withdraw every advertisement he can influence and cut off your American news if you presume to challenge the seaworthiness of the Tayleur. What business is it of yours if 200 or 300 emigrants go to the bottom? Elgin Courier, 28th of April, 1854. Of the 56 children up to 14 years of age on board, 54 were lost. Of the 14 infants on board, only 1 survived. The Belfast Newsletter. Probably the most singular circumstance which occurred throughout the whole lamentable occurrence was the almost miraculous preservation of an infant 9 months old, whose parents had both perished in the sea. Known as the Ocean Child, he was placed in the temporary care of Reverend John Hopkins Armstrong of Herbert Place, Dublin, himself an orphan. He was instrumental in setting up a subscription for the child's welfare, as he said in a letter published in the Dublin Evening Mail, for the future benefit of the child in case he is claimed by relatives and it be found that their circumstances are such as to require assistance. In seeking to trace the Ocean Child's nearest family, Armstrong placed advertisements in many papers across Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England, including the Bath Chronicle and Weekly Gazette. February the 2nd, 1854. Boy about 12 months old, unweaned, fine skin, blue eyes, dark eyelashes, light curly hair, square, prominent forehead, 2 lower teeth, without any marks whatsoever on the body, of a lively and affectionate disposition. Armstrong published a letter in the Dublin Evening Mail a few weeks later, February 22nd, 1854. I am happy to say that I have discovered the relatives of the little fellow saved from the wreck of the Tayleur, who has been in my house this last 4 weeks. It appears that he is Arthur Charles, son of Charles Griffiths, who had been formerly a servant in the neighborhood of Hereford, and latterly kept a small shop. His maternal grandmother has come over to claim him, and into her hands I have this day delivered up the child. She lives near Hereford, and I have ascertained, by reference to my friend the Reverend J. Jebb, rector of Peterstow, Ross, who lives in that neighborhood and who kindly investigated the matter, that she and all his relations are respectable people of good character and members of the established church, and very poor. The old woman earns her livelihood by weeding in gardens and other similar work. A mere 5 weeks later, however, on April the 3rd, another letter from the Reverend Armstrong was printed in the Hereford Journal. It is with much sorrow that I have to announce to the many persons in England and Ireland who took a warm interest in the young infant saved from the wreck of the Tayleur, that the life then so wondrously preserved has just been closed. I have this morning received a letter from the Reverend John Jebb, who has anxiously watched over the child since he left my house, informing me that yesterday the little fellow sank under a chronic intestinal disorder. notwithstanding everything that was done for him, which was in the power of a skillful physician. Allow me just to state that sympathy for the ocean child, Arthur Charles Griffiths, was not confined to the upper class. While the wealthy and the titled contributed and offered to adopt the child, the artisan, the mechanic and the labourer, and many from Dublin sent me their generous proposals, and to their honour, be it stated, offered to share with him their hard-earned wages and to rear him as their own. He is now in better hands, but may they receive their reward. Reverend John H. Armstrong.
That was Ocean Child, recorded live in January at the Lark Theatre in Balbriggan for TradFest. It was performed by Neil Martin and his fellow West Ocean String Quartet members Maria Ryan, Niamh Crowley and Ken Rice, alongside Louise Mulcahy on uilleann pipes, Geraldine O'Doherty on harp, boy soprano Matthew Indicuzzi and actor Stephen Rea. Huge thanks to everyone at TradFest, Fingal County Council and the Lark Theatre in Balbriggan. From me, Stephen McCauley, bye for now.